Last time we spoke about Operation Capital. In late November, General Gill's 32nd Division secured Limon and attacked Ormoc, while General Arnold's 7th Division prepared to flank Japanese forces. Intense fighting marked the attack on Kalai Ridge, resulting in a costly victory for the Americans. Meanwhile, Japanese operations faltered as supplies dwindled. By December, Allied plans for the Luzon's invasion were set, but delays in securing air support complicated the Mindoro operation. Across the seas, naval battles raged, revealing the fierce struggle for control over the Pacific. In December, the Chinese launched renewed attacks on the fortified Japanese positions in Mamo, but faced fierce resistance. While the 113th Regiment struggled, the 114th found early success, aided by coordinated artillery and air support. As casualties mounted, General Honda ordered reinforcements for Hara's garrison, leading to a desperate counterattack. Despite heavy losses, Japanese forces managed to retreat to safety. Amidst ongoing skirmishes, the Allies realized their strategies would need revision to face a shifting tide of battle effectively. This episode is The Fall of Ormoc. Welcome back to the Pacific War Podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at The Age of Conquest, The Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube and on major podcast platforms. Over there, I just released a full documentary covering the life of Lieutenant Colonel Tom Williams and his service during the Vietnam War. It can also be found in podcast form. Also, if you do have a chance, it would help me out tremendously if you join my new YouTube membership, which is identical to my Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Joining either gets you access to the exclusive podcast, which is about 25 plus episodes and ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Last we left off, the Japanese were preparing to initiate their Wa offensive. General Arnold's troops had successfully taken control of Shoestring Ridge, and they were poised to launch a fresh attack against Ormoc. By December the 4th, the tanks of the 776th Amphibian Tank Battalion were positioned near Balogo, ready to strike enemy positions ahead of the main assault. The next morning, these tanks targeted the weakened Japanese defenses at Balogo and Tabgas before subsequently withdrawing. There were numerous finger ridges inland that were cutting into deep ravines and gorges, and they came within a few yards of the coastline. The entrenched Japanese, using reverse slope tactics, were able to deliver deadly fire on the advancing infantry. In many cases, the reverse slopes were so steep that effective artillery fire could not be placed upon them. The 2nd Battalion 184th Infantry moved forward slowly towards a small hill, which faced the Palanas River, and at 8:58 they encountered small enemy arms fire from the western slope of the hill. Using grenades, the battalion pushed forward, but at 9:38 the Japanese opened up with 3 light machine guns. The supporting weapons of the 2nd Battalion fired on the enemy positions to the front. At 10:37, as the battalion reached the military crest of the hill, the Japanese launched a small counterattack against the left flank of Company E. This attack was repulsed, but the companies continued to receive small arms and machine gun fire. At 1:25, the 1st Battalion renewed its advance and proceeded without incident, finding the situation oddly very quiet to its front. At 2:35, the battalion dug in for the night approximately 300 yards south of Balogo. The 3rd Battalion moved through the gap between the 1st and 2nd Battalions and across the front of the 2nd Battalion on the right towards Hill 380, which consisted of a series of ridges. As the 3rd Battalion advanced towards the hill, it came under machine gun fire on each flank. With artillery support, the troops reached the top of the 2nd ridge of Hill 380 and then they dug in, 9 of the men having been wounded. At about 4:35, the battalions of the 184th Infantry received orders to set up night defense positions in depth and to hold the positions at all cost. Colonel Sullivan decided that the 3rd Battalion was to bear the brunt of the advance of the 184th Infantry on December the 6th and to push on to Hill 380. Over on the right of the 184th, the 17th Infantry had been busy all day working towards its objective, Hill 918. At 8 a.m. on December the 5th, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 17th Infantry, with the 1st Battalion on the left, had moved through the 32nd Infantry. At 9:06, the advance elements of the 1st Battalion secured a ridge south of the main ridge leading from Hill 918, and at around 10 a.m. the entire battalion closed in on this ridge. In the face of sporadic rifle and machine gun fire, the leading platoons pushed forward to secure a ridge that led west from Hill 918. As the advanced platoons neared the crest of the ridge, they received intense rifle, machine gun, and mortar fire to the front and on both flanks from the 2nd Battalion, 12th Independent Infantry Regiment. At the same time, the rest of the battalion, in attempting to reach a forward ridge and to support the leading platoons, also encountered crossfire that came down the intervening draw. As enemy gunfire pinned down the troops, the 1st Battalion lost contact with Company G of the 2nd Battalion, and a gap developed between the 1st and 2nd Battalions. At the end of December the 5th, the 17th Infantry had secured the ridge west of Hill 918. The 184th Infantry had secured a line extending from the beach 300 yards south of Balogo, east to the high ground southeast of the Tabas River. Company K of the 32nd Infantry had filled the gap that existed between the 17th and 184th, while the 3rd Battalion, 184th Infantry, had crossed the Tabas River, and advancing up southwest of the slopes of Hill 380, they reached the top of the first ridge. The next day, the 2nd Battalion had driven forward with Company E on the right and Company G on the left. Company E went east along the Buchan River for approximately 1,000 yards, and then they turned northeast to ascend Hill 918. At first, however, the company had to secure a small ridge southwest of Hill 918, on which was a small but dense banana grove. Company E encountered and destroyed a small enemy force on this ridge, after which the company reorganized and at approximately 1 o'clock began to ascend Hill 918. When Company E reached the military crest of the hill, the Japanese began heavy firing with grenade launchers and at least 3 machine guns. The enemy fire swept the crest of the hill and prevented any movement over the lip of the ridge. Meanwhile, Company G went to the left of Company E and secured a small ridge about 1,200 yards from the line of departure and west of Hill 918. The advanced platoon of Company G then received fire from automatic weapons that were emplaced in a draw to the left front of the platoon. The rest of the company attempted to move around to the right of the ridge, but also encountered automatic weapons fire coming from another draw. Since high cotton grass covered the area, observation was limited to a matter of inches. At about 1 o'clock, elements of the 13th Independent Infantry Regiment counterattacked through a gap between Company G and Company A of the 1st Battalion. A machine platoon which was thrown in to plug the gap succeeded in stopping the attempted Japanese advance. Company G, however, continued to be pinned down by enemy fire directed at its front. Company F, the reserve company, was then committed to take a position between G and E Company. Its mission was to come abreast of Company E, to take Hill 918, and then to turn west and wipe out the resistance in front of Company G. At 2:15, Company F moved up Hill 918 and then reached Company E without any opposition. 3 spurs led down from Hill 918. The one occupied by Company E ran southwest, the one occupied by Company F ran west, and the third ran northwest. As the 2 commanders started to launch a coordinated assault from the respective spurs, their companies received a concentration of about 50 rounds of mortar fire, but pushed through this fire and secured the crests of both spurs. They immediately came under automatic weapons and rifle fire from the northwest ridge. Since the left flank of Company F was in the tall cotton grass, it was practically impossible for the company to observe the enemy. On the other hand, Company E was on barren open ground, which exposed it to machine gun and mortar fire from Hill 918. Both companies also came under long-range machine gun fire from the vicinity of Kang Dagit, northeast of Hill 918. It was impractical to attempt an envelopment to the right, since the flank of Company E rested on a deep ravine which ran to the bed of the Bagan River. An envelopment to the left would have necessitated going down the hill, circling behind Company G, and attacking east from the positions of the 1st Battalion. Because of these unfavorable conditions, Companies E and F, with their wounded, withdrew to make a line with Company G. Meanwhile, the Japanese continued their preparations for Operation Wa, which was already set to fail from the offset. General Makino's 16th Division could only advance a composite battalion of 500 men, which incurred 200 casualties en route. Additionally, General Yamagata's 26th Division was still mobilizing to reach its assembly area, with only 1 forward battalion prepared for action. Consequently, feeling inadequately prepared, General Suzuki requested a delay in the attack, and General Yamashita effectively rescheduled it for the night of December the 6th. From his new headquarters in Luby, Suzuki communicated this update to the 16th and 26th Divisions, but due to radio issues, Makino was never informed. Meanwhile, General Bruce's 77th Division was organizing a risky amphibious invasion of Ormac. As per General Hodge's strategy, Rear Admiral Arthur Strubel's Task Force 78.3, consisting of around a dozen destroyers, was assigned the task of transporting and landing the 77th Division, along with its supplies and equipment, at the barrio of Desposito, located southeast of Ormac. Upon landing, Bruce's forces were to advance northwards to capture Ormac, and then to proceed up the Ormac corridor to connect with units of General Silbert's 10th Corps. To facilitate this operation, the 5th Air Force would provide continuous air support, both day and night, for the assault convoy en route to the target, during the landings, and for the return trip. In addition, General Gill's 32nd Division was set to initiate an offensive southwards along Highway 2, towards Ormac, while the 7th Division pressed northwards to seize the elevated terrain south of the Panilahan River. Consequently, on December the 5th, the 127th Regiment commenced its advance past Colonel Hettinger's 3rd Battalion, facing staunch resistance from General Catioca's 1st Division, which was well entrenched on some high ground 1,000 yards south of the Ley River Bridge. The well-camouflaged enemy defenses consisted of numerous foxholes and 10-foot deep spider holes, many of which were connected by interlacing communication trenches. The terrain that the troops traversed was adapted to defensive fighting, and the 1st Division took full advantage of this fact. There were deep ravines and steep hills where the enemy had dug in both the forward and reverse slopes. The entire area was covered by heavy rainforest with dense underbrush as well. The nearly constant rainfall made observation difficult, and the maps for the area were very inaccurate. The 77th Division continued to assemble its troops on Tarragona Beach, on the east coast of Leyte, and during the night of December the 5th, the loading of supplies and equipment on the landing ships began. The loading was slowed by frequent air raids. The division had previously been told that the convoy would be unable to stay in the landing area more than 2 hours, and consequently there was no attempt to bulk the load supplies, since they would take too long to unload. All supplies and equipment to support the initial assault had to be mobile loaded, that is, loaded onto vehicles, taken with the division so that the supplies could be brought ashore in the vehicles upon debarkation. There were only 289 vehicles in the initial convoy, including tanks, M8s, and M10s that could carry the supplies. The LVTs were filled with supplies rather than troops in order so that they could be discharged from the landing ships into the water and go ashore fully loaded. Furthermore, since the supplies were mobile, they could be moved either by water or inland by motor. The 77th Division gave the highest priority to ammunition, water, and rations. Makino also initiated his segment of the Wa offensive, with around 150 Japanese troops stealthily advancing towards the Buri airstrip. At the same time, Major General Joseph Swing's 11th Airborne Division was tasked with securing the Burin area, although most of the division was engaged in combat for the mountain passes leading to Albuera. Additionally, Major General Henry Jones' 38th Division had been deployed at Leyte to prepare for the future operations, but could also reinforce Swing, along with the portions of General Bradley's 96th Division if needed. At 6 a.m. on December the 6th, the 287th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, located northwest of Bahrain, spotted Makino's troops crossing the main road south of their position and moving east towards the Buri Field. While the artillery team communicated this information to the 24th Corps, the Japanese forces advanced into the swamp near the airfield prior to initiating their assault. At 6:30, the 16th Division launched its surprise attack. Led by a Filipino, the Japanese broke into the American bivouac area while the men were still asleep. Some were bayoneted while in their blankets, or before they could even seize their weapons. Others held the Japanese off until they could retreat, shoeless and in their shorts and undershirts, either up the bluff to the headquarters of the 5th Bomber Command or to the road where an infantry company had come in to support. The service troops were, quote, firing at everything that moves, and probably inflicting casualties amongst our own troops. Swift promptly responded by deploying the 1st Battalion of the 187th Glider Regiment to counterattack towards Buri, while Hodge assigned the 1st Battalion of the 382nd Regiment to Swift's command. The battalion was to proceed immediately to the aid of the 2 companies of the 11th Airborne Division in the Buri airfield area. General Hodge emphasized that the area was critical and must be kept closed. It would be dangerous to let the enemy get into the service troops along the road and its airfields. One reinforced company of the 1st Battalion was already in the area, and the rest of the battalion made ready to follow. This reinforcement allowed one bolstered company to quickly support the service troops, effectively holding back the enemy, with the glider units taking a position near the airfield. When the Americans launched a coordinated counteroffensive, they succeeded in driving the Japanese from the Bury airfield by nightfall, though some resistance remained at the edges of the airstrip. Meanwhile, Arnold maintained his offensive, with the 184th Regiment advancing through Hill 380 to secure Balogo, while the 17th Regiment captured the abandoned enemy positions on Hill 918 and moved up Hill 380 to join the 184th. By midday, the loading of the 77th Division was complete, and the convoy gathered off Dulag to await the arrival of Struebel's escorting destroyers. At 1:30, Struebel's main convoy set sail, having been preceded by 4 slower LSTs under the protection of 2 destroyers. While American transports and destroyers navigated silently towards Ormoc Bay, General Tominaga activated the airborne segment of Operation Wa. He planned to deploy an initial wave of 40 Mitsubishi Ki-57 transports carrying 409 paratroopers, primarily targeting the Bury, San Pablo, and Bayug airstrips to capture them. In a related secondary attack, 2 pairs of transports would drop smaller groups of paratroopers over the Dulag and Tacloban airstrips to destroy as many American aircraft and facilities as possible. The transports would have Ki-43 fighters as escort, and 21 medium bombers were dispatched to bomb and strafe the Bury, San Pablo, and Bayug airstrips shortly before the paratroopers' descent. 2 additional waves were scheduled, the first 5 hours after the initial assault, comprising 270 troops in 21 aircraft, followed by a third wave of 80 soldiers 6 hours later. These follow-up operations were intended to assist in eliminating any remaining resistance, after which a defense would be established at the captured airfield. The primary goal of this operation was to incapacitate the enemy's airstrips to ensure the safe arrival of the last TA convoys with critical reinforcements to Leyte. The attack was synchronized with Admiral Okiwachi's 8th convoy, which included 3 destroyers, 2 subchasers, and 5 transport ships carrying Major General Kuriso Tekeo's 68th Brigade, having departed from Manila on December the 5th and expecting to reach Albuera 2 days later. After taking off at 3:30, Tominaga's 1st Echelon headed towards the Baron area. Just before dark, 39 Japanese transports with supporting bombers and fighters roared over the Baron airfields. Several incendiary bombs fell on San Pablo Strip, setting a gasoline dump afire and burning a liaison plane. Despite American fighters destroying 18 planes, they managed to deploy over 300 paratroopers by 7 o'clock, following preparatory bombing and the deployment of smokescreen. However, the intense anti-aircraft fire caused some confusion, leading pilots to drop soldiers at incorrect locations. Still, approximately 60 paratroopers descended on Bury, while more than over 250 landed at San Pablo. Meanwhile, the secondary attack on the Dulag and Tacloban strips completely miscarried. 2 transports flew over the former installation, one dropped about 5 paratroopers and then crashed, while the other crashed at about 4,500 yards northeast of the field. Over Tacloban, 2 medium bombers converted to transports lowered their flaps and wheels, preparing to land, but one was shot down and the other crashed. Nonetheless, upon landing, the paratroopers quickly advanced along both the north and south sides of the San Pablo Strip, and as they did so, they talked in loud tones and allegedly called out in English, stating, "Hello, where are your machine guns?" Most of the enemy forces assembled on the north side of the airstrip. They burned 3 or 4 more liaison planes, a jeep, several tents, and another gasoline dump, throwing ammunition on the latter. Quite fortunately for the Americans, terrible weather conditions combined with significant Japanese transport losses prevented the subsequent waves of reinforcements from being dispatched. On the night of December the 6th, the Air Corps service personnel had abruptly quitted the Bury airfield, leaving behind carbines, rifles, grenades, small arms ammunition, and machine guns. 2nd Lieutenant Rudolph Mamula of the 767th Tank Battalion had been ordered to take charge of the situation, to coordinate the action of the forces on the airstrip, to recover the abandoned armaments and ammunition. Apparently, he was unsuccessful because later in the day the Japanese made the very best use they could of the said arms and ammunition. By the middle of the morning on the 7th, the enemy had completely occupied the Bury airstrip. In response, Swift quickly ordered the 674th Glider Field Artillery Battalion to abandon their artillery and to support the 127th Airborne Engineer Battalion, which was near San Pablo, preparing to reclaim the airstrip. General Kruger also reacted swiftly, allocating 2 battalions from the 148th Regiment to Hodges' command, who dispatched them towards San Pablo as well. However, before their arrival, Swift's forces had already initiated their counteroffensive at dawn December the 7th, successfully driving the paratroopers back to the northwest until they ran out of ammunition. Fortunately, the Japanese chose to retreat towards Bury rather than continue the battle over San Pablo. At 2 o'clock, upon the arrival of the 148th Battalion, Swift promptly ordered them to launch an attack towards Bury. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 149th, 38th Division were alerted at 2 a.m. on December the 7th for movement to the San Pablo airstrip. The advance elements of the 1st Battalion were greeted at the San Pablo airstrip by General Swing, who was reported to have said, "Glad to see you. I am General Swing of the 11th Airborne Division. We've been having a hell of a time here. Last night, approximately 75 Jap paratroopers dropped on us, of which we have accounted for about 50. 1,500 yards from here is another airstrip just like this one. Between here and there are about 25 Jap troopers. It is now 2 o'clock. I want this strip secure by nightfall." The commanding officer of the 1st Battalion decided to attack with Companies A and C abreast. Company A on the right, with approximately a 200-yard frontage for each company. A section of heavy machine guns was attached to each unit, and a platoon of 81mm mortars from Company D was to support the attack from positions on San Pablo's airstrip. The 1st Battalion set out at 2:30, moving the first 400 yards without any issue, but eventually encountered a rain-swollen swamp that impeded their progress, resulting in the companies losing contact with another. By nightfall, only Companies A and C had reached the airstrip, but they were unable to initiate their attack due to the late hour. Simultaneously, the 1st Battalion of the 187th Glider Regiment and the 1st Battalion of the 382nd Regiment advanced towards Bury and successfully joined the 1st Battalion of the 149th Regiment at the western end of the airstrip by the end of the day. In the meantime, Arnold continued his limited offensive on December the 7th, with the 184th Regiment facing little resistance as it ascended the high ground overlooking the Tabas River. At dawn, the 17th Infantry set up patrols. The one from the 1st Battalion located an enemy heavy machine gun, 2 light machine guns, and a motor, and placed 150 yards from the battalion's lines. When the patrol returned, mortar fire was placed on the position, and it was wiped out. The 1st Battalion moved out approximately at 9 a.m. Though long-range fire fell on the troops and small arms fire hit the left flank of Company C, the men continued to push forward. The battalion found several ridges leading up to Hill 380, a knife-like ridge in front of Company C, and a double ridge in the form of a horseshoe with its closed end towards the hill, in front of Company B. Company B moved across a double ridge while Company C forced its passage through machine gun and rifle fire across the closed part of the horseshoe. At 4 o'clock, the two companies re-established contact on the northmost ridge leading to Hill 380. At 4:30, the Japanese with machine guns launched a counterattack against the right flank of the 3rd Battalion, 184th Infantry, and the left flank of the 1st Battalion, 17th Infantry. The 3rd Battalion, 184th was pinned down, but did not yield any ground. The troops at the front lines of the 1st Battalion, 17th, at first were forced back slightly, but in a few minutes regained their lost ground. They dug in for the night on the crest of the ridge. After its dawn patrols had reported, on December the 7th, the 2nd Battalion, 17th Infantry jumped off to attack. Company E secured the first of the 3 spurs leading from Hill 380, and continued forward to the middle spur in the face of light fire that came from in front of the company in the area of the 17th Infantry wished to secure. Presently, the fire grew to considerable intensity, and the company's section of light machine guns and 2 platoons of heavy machine guns moved onto the middle spur, where they neutralized the enemy position. While this action was going on, Companies G and F moved to the first spur. Company G received orders from the battalion commander to make a wide envelopment of Hill 380, and then to assault the hill from the east. At 9:30, the company jumped below the military crest of the southern slope of Hill 380, unobserved, and made its way very slowly over the steep terrain and through the thick Congo grass. At 12 o'clock, the 49th Field Artillery Battalion laid a 5-minute preparatory fire in front of the battalion. The American troops then routed the surprised Japanese defenders and killed the majority of them as they fled into the mountains northeast of the hill. Apparently realizing that Hill 380 was the key to the defense of the Tabas River Valley and that of Hill 606, troops of the 26th Division poured long-range machine gun fire from Hill 606 into Company G, and at the same time halted the company with small arms fire from the immediate left along the ridge. At 1:55, after a heavy mortar barrage, about 50 men from the 26th Division counterattacked the positions of Company G, but the company held firm and mowed down the attackers with fire from its rifles and automatic weapons. The position on the hill was maintained. Although Company G occupied the top of Hill 380, it was not in a position to aid the advance of Company E. The Japanese troops were dug in on the reverse slopes and could only be routed out by closed-in fighting. The commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion committed Company F down the main spur from the east, supported by Companies E and G, and machine guns from Company H. As soon as Company F started down the ridge, the enemy concentrated fire upon it, both from the north and the west. In a matter of minutes, Company F was reduced to a point where the number of its riflemen hardly equaled one platoon. The company commander secured an additional platoon from Company G and renewed its assault behind a concentration of 100 rounds of 60mm mortar fire and 80 rounds of 81mm mortar fire. The attack succeeded, and the enemy force was overrun and annihilated. Company E thereupon moved to the main ridge and helped mop up the area. At 7 a.m., the 3rd Battalion 17th Infantry moved out, reaching the source of the Tabas River at about 2 o'clock. An enemy force of about 50 men was observed in a natural bowl to its immediate front. The battalion placed long-range rifle and machine gun fire on the group as 2 platoons from Company K attacked from its flank. They destroyed the entire Japanese force without any casualties to the American troops. The 3rd Battalion then crossed the Tabas River and went into the night perimeter at Kangyanto. At 7:07, 8 rounds of artillery fire fell into the area, killing 7 men and wounding 18 others. At the end of the day, the 184th Infantry was on the banks of the Tabas River, and the 17th Infantry had secured Hill 380, which commanded the Tabas River Valley. Arnold's offensive had become so precarious that Yamagata was forced to halt his division's advance towards Bahrain and instead redirect them to defend Albuera, only sending his advance battalion to participate in the Wa offensive. The situation was even worse for Yamagata as Struvel's convoy finally arrived off Desposito just before dawn. At 6:34, an enemy shore battery opened fire, and at 6:40, the destroyers responded by targeting their assigned locations. As the Japanese communicated this information to higher command, Okawachi received orders to land the 68th Brigade at San Isidro. Additionally, the 1st Combined Base Air Force and the 4th Air Army were directed to unleash all their resources against the landing forces. With Suzuki absent, Major General Tomichika Yoshiharu took charge of the defense of Ormoc, promptly instructing the Mitsue shipping unit to secure defensive positions on the Red Roof Hill. Meanwhile, the Imahori detachment was ordered to evacuate south through Ormoc to confront the enemy. Elements of the 77th Regiment, which had just arrived by barge to Ipil, were also tasked with reinforcing the defense of Ormoc. Furthermore, Suzuki commanded the 16th and 26th Divisions to halt the Wa offensive and to retreat immediately towards Ormoc. Over in Manila, Okawachi and Yamashita were preparing to send 2 provisional companies from the 58th Independent Mixed Brigade to garrison the Camotes Islands to counter the arrival of enemy reinforcements and suppress guerrilla activity in the region. Meanwhile, after Okawachi's latest convoy was detected, 57 P-47s were dispatched to strike the Japanese vessels while the 68th Brigade was being disembarked. In one of the fiercest aerial battles of the Leyte campaign, the fighters strafed the vessels and dropped over 94 1,000-pound and 6 500-pound bombs on enemy shipping, successfully destroying all 5 transports and damaging 2 others. However, the 68th Brigade landed, albeit lacking most of its equipment, supplies, and heavy weaponry. Back at Ormoc Bay, General Bruce's first wave, composed of the leading battalions from the 305th and 307th Regiments, successfully landed on the White Beaches without encountering opposition at 7:07. And then the troops quickly moved inland. The subsequent 4 waves of troops, including 2 battalions from the 306th Regiment, came ashore without incident. At 8:20, around 138 Japanese aircraft launched an assault on Struvel's convoy. Despite the 5th Air Force executing a commendable interception of the attackers, some determined enemy planes managed to breach the anti-aircraft defenses and strike the American ships. On the morning of December the 7th, 3 years to the day after she fired the opening shots on the Pearl Harbor attack, the destroyer USS Ward came under attack by several Japanese kamikaze while patrolling off the invasion area. One bomber hit her hull amidship, bringing her to a dead stop. When the resulting fires could not be controlled, Ward's crew were ordered to abandon ship, and she was sunk by gunfire from the O'Brien, whose commanding officer, William Outerbridge, had been in command of the Ward during her action in Hawaii 3 years before. Nevertheless, their attempt to thwart this crucial invasion was once again ended in failure. By 11 a.m., approximately 10,000 troops and most of their supplies had been landed, but under relentless air attack, Struble ultimately decided to withdraw and return to San Pedro Bay. Meanwhile, Bruce's forces were expanding their initial beachhead inland, with the 305th Regiment capturing crossings over the Bagambon River, and the 307th Regiment securing a bridge over the Baude River. Due to a lack of organized resistance, Bruce chose to continue advancing north along the highway to extend the division's foothold to Epil. Consequently, the 307th began its northward advance at around 10:45, gradually facing stiffer opposition as it approached its goal. By 2:55, they reached the outskirts of Ipil and commenced an assault on the defenses of the two companies from the 77th Regiment, successfully killing 66 Japanese soldiers as they cleared the barrio and established a night perimeter on the northern edge by 5:40. With Bruce's forces having secured a 2-mile beachhead, Yamagata's 26th Division found itself caught between two robust American divisions, leaving the route to Ormoc largely open for the 77th Division. On December the 8th, as the first two companies of the 12th Independent Regiment arrived to bolster the Matsue shipping unit, the 307th Regiment resumed its advance northwards, swiftly reaching the Panalayan River, where they began meeting stronger resistance. Successfully repelling enemy counterattacks, the 307th continued to push forward and achieved a total gain of about 2,000 yards by the day's end. At the same time, since half of the 2nd Raiding Brigade could not be airdropped during the now-halted Wa offensive, the Japanese decided to land them at the Valencia airstrip over the coming days to reinforce the defenders in Ormac. Furthermore, Okawachi Yamashita designated the Takahashi Detachment, organized around the 5th Regiment, as an emergency reinforcement to depart for Leyte immediately, alongside the Ito Naval Landing Unit of the SNLF Marines. Additionally, the 39th Regiment of the 10th Division was assigned to prepare for a counter-landing in the Karigara Bay region. Meanwhile, as the 26th Division began to withdraw along the coast to retreat through the ridges towards Ormoc, the 184th and 17th Regiments captured Hill 606 and moved forward to the Sibuge River. During the night of December the 7th, the Japanese brought forward 2 machine guns and emplaced them directly in front of Company A of the 1st Battalion, 382nd Infantry. At dawn, the machine guns opened fire. Their low grazing fire pinned down the company, but Private Warren Perkins, in the face of the enemy bullets, located the guns and called for mortar fire upon them. The mortar concentration, falling within 50 yards of Perkins, silenced the machine guns and startled the Japanese. Private Ova Kelly took advantage of the confusion and charged with his M1 rifle and carbine. Kelly killed 8 of the enemy before he himself was slain. The rest of Company A followed Kelly and secured the edge of the airstrip, where they set up a perimeter. During December the 8th, the Americans consolidated their positions. The following day, the 1st Battalion of the 149th Regiment launched an assault to the north, successfully crossing the airstrip and eliminating approximately 50 paratroopers before being halted by enemy fire. By nightfall, the 1st Battalion of the 382nd Regiment repelled another determined counterattack, killing an additional 50 Japanese soldiers and leaving around 100 paratroopers trapped on the airstrip. Concurrently, the 17th and 184th Regiments advanced through Albiera without opposition, continuing their movement through challenging terrain towards Gungab. In the early hours of December the 9th, Struble's initial resupply convoy reached Esposito, delivering the remainder of the 306th Regiment. As a result, its 1st Battalion was assigned to the 307th Regiment and probably engaged the northward attack. Progressing gradually through the formidable enemy ridge defenses, the 307th ultimately captured Camp Downs, while the 305th Regiment secured the northeastern area. During this advance, the rest of the 77th Regiment also arrived by barge at Palumpon, where they were immediately deployed to bolster the defenders in Ormac. Ormac, the largest and most important commercial center in western Leyte, possessed a concrete and pile pier, at which a vessel with a 16-foot draft and 2 smaller vessels could anchor at the same time. On the route to Ormac and in the town itself, the Japanese dug strong defensive positions. The favorite sites were in bamboo thickets, on the river slopes, along creek beds, and under buildings. Individual spider holes about 6 feet deep were covered with logs and earth and beautifully camouflaged. Against such positions, artillery and mortar fire did little more than daze the defenders. Thus each position had to be searched out and destroyed. The next day, for the final assault on Ormoc, Bruce planned to deploy the 307th Regiment to attack along the highway, while the 306th Regiment would move northeast to encircle the opposing enemy forces. After a significant artillery barrage, Bruce first dispatched Company A of the 776th Amphibian Tank Battalion, supported by rocket fire from LCMs and LCVs, to launch an assault on the city's strong enemy defenses. Following this, the 306th and 307th Regiments advanced, while the latter encountered minimal resistance until approaching the outskirts of Ormoc. Despite facing fierce opposition, the Mitsui unit was effectively driven back, allowing the 307th to enter the city, while the 306th advanced northeast with very little resistance. The two regiments then pressured the enemy like squeezing a tube of toothpaste, ultimately forcing the determined defenders to retreat to the hills north of Ormoc, where the Imahori detachment was gathering. However, some defenders remained behind, valiantly fighting to delay the American advance. Positioned in spider holes beneath the buildings, they resisted until they were overwhelmed. At the same time, the 77th Division was entering Ormoc. The 32nd Division was pushing southwards towards Ormoc Valley. The 11th Airborne Division was working westwards over the mountains towards the town, and the 7th Division was pushing northwards along the eastern coast of Ormoc Bay in an attempt to make a juncture with the 77th Division. General Bruce advised General Hodge, "We've rolled 2 7s in Ormoc. Com 7, Com 11. As his troops were reducing Ormoc, General Bruce also made a report on the status of the attack, and referred to a promise that had been made by the commanding general of the 5th Air Force. "Where is the case of scotch that was promised by General Whitehead for the capture of Ormoc? I don't drink, but I have an assistant division commander and a regimental commanders who do." In its advance to the north, the 77th Division reportedly killed around 1,506 Japanese soldiers, while they captured 7 prisoners, at the cost of 123 men killed, 329 wounded, and 13 missing. The capture of Ormoc had significant consequences. It split the Japanese forces and isolated the remaining elements of the 26th Division. It diverted and eliminated previously uncommitted enemy reserves, easing the pressure on other fronts. It expedited the connection between the 10th Corps and the 24th Corps, and it prevented the Japanese from using Ormoc as a port, through which many reinforcements and supplies had been funneled into the campaign. Consequently, the Japanese had faced a clear defeat on Ley Island. Nevertheless, they were determined to continue fighting to the very death, senselessly sending more troops into battle, which unnecessarily extended the campaign by several additional months. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Age of Conquest, The Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all of that, you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and the soon-to-be-renamed Echoes of War podcast, found on all major podcast platforms. I recently uploaded a full documentary covering the life of Lieutenant Colonel Tom Williams and his service during Vietnam. It can also be found in a podcast form. And please, if you'd like to support me further, check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Joining either gets you access to the exclusive podcast, with over 25 plus episodes ongoing. You also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And actually, I just put up the poll for the next exclusive podcast. It is a choice between who financed World War I and why, allowing someone to interview me, the sabotage of the German nuclear program during World War II, or how the Sicilian mob aided the Allies during World War II. So if any of those are interesting to you, please go check it out. Japanese forces prepared Operation Wa, while the United States troops engaged in intense battles for strategic positions like Hill 918 and Balogo amid challenging terrain and strong defenses. Despite initial setbacks, American forces regrouped, successfully counterattacking Japanese positions and securing strategic areas, while Japanese reinforcements struggled amidst heavy losses and unfavorable weather conditions.